Hey everybody, Ron Bielefeld, Whistling Wings Photography. Welcome to another video, this time post-processing your images. Not capturing them. That's a big, important part of photography, of course. If you don't capture any images, you don't have anything to look at or use for anything, but a huge part of digital photography, of course, especially if you're shooting raw, is post-processing. If you're shooting raw, you have to post-process your images to make them look their best, to get the most out of your images that you possibly can. In this video, I will show you my post-processing workflow. Two different versions of it. One where I go through it slowly and you can see the detail, and I'll talk more about the different steps. And then at the end, I will have a much quicker version where I don't talk so much. A lot of you will say, well, that's good because Ron talks a lot. And well, where I don't talk so much and I just go through the workflow really quickly. You can pick and choose whichever version you want to watch both of them, whatever. But in the end, I hope you have a good feel for my workflow and see that I think it's pretty effective. So from here, let's go to the computer and we'll post-process a couple images. So the first thing we need to do is have some images in Lightroom to post-process. So the obvious place to start is with importing images into Lightroom. And I have a card from a shoot this morning. Just went out and shot a bunch of images, so at least I have some images on a card for this demonstration. And here's where I might do things a little bit differently than a lot of people do. A lot of people would take their card, put it in a card reader, attach it to their computer. I do that. And then they're going to dump all of the images. I may have 2,500, 3,000 images on a card, and then dump all those images onto an external hard drive that's connected to their computer. Well, I don't do that. By doing that, first of all, that takes time to dump all those images, and then you're probably only going to keep a very small proportion of those images that you're going to post-process, and then you're going to have to remove all those thousands potentially of images that you just dumped onto the hard drive back off. And that takes more time. So that's not very efficient. It's also not very good for your hard drives. Put a bunch of stuff on, taking a bunch of stuff off all the time. So I do it a little bit differently, and Lightroom allows you to do it in a really efficient manner. And that's what we're going to do first. So we're going to come down here to the import button. We're in the library module. In the library module, we're going to come down to the import button on the bottom left hand corner and click import. It can take a little time, especially when I'm recording like this, to get everything up and running. I've got a fairly large catalog, and we can talk a little bit about how Lightroom Classic works when you import images. The first thing you do is create a catalog for your imported images to be put into, and that's what Lightroom will read then when every time you start up the program, and it'll go to your last catalog. And you can have several catalogs. A lot of people make a lot of catalogs, and that's not really the way I do it. I make one catalog per year, if that. Sometimes I might have 2 years of shooting in a catalog, and then when it gets kind of big, I'll make a new catalog. If you want to separate and organize your images within a catalog, you use something like collections. I don't do that. I organize my images on my external hard drive in my own file formatting system. So I don't use collections and stuff like that in Lightroom. But anyway, here we are now. We are in the import dialog of the library module in Lightroom Classic. And so what we need to do is look for our card that we have connected to the computer. And it's right here. It is EOS Digital G. Let's expand that. Go to DCIM because that's where all the images are going to be. And if there's subfolders underneath that, they will show up like 100 EOS, right? That's where all the images are. And if you have up here in this dialog under the EOS Digital, you see include subfolders. If you have that checked, what's nice is if you have multiple folders on your card, so you'll have multiple subfiles under the DCIM folder. within your card logical drive that's showing up here, you can just highlight DCIM and it will cover every subfolder as well. So it'll bring up all the images at once. That way you don't forget that you have multiple folders on there. I think I've done that, and I think a lot of you have probably done that as well, where you forget that you also have a 101, a 102, a 103 folder, and you think, where did those images? And then you delete them off your card later on, and it's just like, oh, you never did import those images or even look at them. By going to DCIM again and having the include subfolders checked, you can just highlight DCIM and it'll bring up all the images in every subfolder underneath that folder. So here we are. All of the images from this morning are in here, and we can come down on the right hand side and look at the destination. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I can see that I have over 2,400 images from this morning. Like we talked about earlier, I don't want to import all of those images. I only want to import a select few. So what Lightroom makes that really easy. Lightroom Classic makes that really easy. We're going to go up here to the all photos, and it's got a check mark in there. And you can see that every photo in the grid view that we're in right now, which is set down here in the bottom left, you can see that one's highlighted and it says grid view. They're all check marked. That means right now, if I would go down to the bottom right and hit the import button, it would import all 2,400 plus images. Again, for the third or fourth time now, we don't want to do that. We click in that check mark box up there and it unchecks all of the images. So now what we're going to do is we're going to highlight the first one, go down to loop view down here in the bottom left, click on that. Now we're going to be able to look at every image separately. And down below in the middle of each image is a box that you can check that says include in import. So we're going to go through all of our images, only checking the ones that we want to import. And that way we're only going to import the very few that we want to keep. That's how I import my images. And if you look now over on the right in the destination where it was lit up, all 2,400 plus images, that number was lit up. Now it says 0 of that number, 2,400 plus images, are scheduled to be imported because we have not selected any of them yet. So let's take a little step backward and talk about your source and your destination and what you want to do with your images coming off your card. First thing, up at the very top, you have four choices up here. You can either copy your images off of your card and when you're importing them into Lightroom Classic and have them converted to DGNs, and then a copy of each image that's on your card be put into a destination, like an external hard drive location, or you can just have them copied, which is what I do. I don't convert them to DGNs. I keep them as the raw file format that they came in this case, CR3s from a Canon R5 Mark II. Or you can just, again, what this is going to do is it's going to copy them off the card and copy them to your destination location that you're going to tell it. We'll talk about that here in a second. You can also have them move instead. If you go over here and click on move, now what it'll do is it'll actually move the image off your card and into the destination that you're going to tell it to go. I don't like move. I want to keep them on my card in case something weird happens. I only delete them off my card when I'm ready to use the card again. That way it's kind of a backup in case something weird happens with import or something like that. Or you can have them have your images added just to the catalog. So there, they don't come off the card. They're not copied from the card. Those images are just added to the catalog. But then if you want to use in post-process, develop those images in the next round, maybe a month down the line, you got to have them still on that card somewhere and plug that card back in. So I use copy. I want to keep the originals on the card, but I want a copy of that image imported into Lightroom's catalog that I'm using, but also copied to the destination that I'm telling it to go to. About the destination, it's over here on the right. I have it set up to where there's a check mark in this box up here that says do not import suspected duplicates. That's in case you've gone through a bunch of your 2000 images, but not all of them, and then you get called away and you got to do something else. And you come back and you forget where you started. Well, if you've already imported some off of the bunch that you're working on, it will tell you if you've already imported that image or not. That's always useful, I think. But down below that, further, is your destination, and that's really what's important here. And you can organize how your images are copied to a destination, again, an external hard drive most likely, by date or by original folders or by into, I do it by date. We'll just go with that. And then you can pick the date format. That's the format I've picked down below there. And so what you can see then is I have below that a bunch of hard drives that are showing up. So now I can click on any one of these hard drives, and that's the hard drive it's going to copy the images to when I hit import later on. I'm gonna, right now, what I have selected is the images, my images 4 drive, which is an external hard drive. And then underneath that, I actually have my folders starting, and I go by year. So I have 2024. I've got on my images 4 drive, I have a folder called 2024 as a subfolder, and I click on that. So now all of my images that I import for this demonstration, and as you can see, there's a lot of dates under there as this year's been going along, will go into that subfolder of 2024 and then put in a subfolder created for the date format that I had up here below. So it's going to be 2024, and then it's going to be organized in subfolders underneath that as the date in 2024. And then we go down a little bit further and we can go back to that area we've already talked about. And that shows that that is 9:30. Yep, 9:30, 2024 this morning when I shot this. And that's where they're going to go once we start going through these images and I start checking some of them for import. So now going through these images, I'm just using my mouse wheel on my mouse. I've got a pretty cool mouse, I think. It's a Logitech Master MX3 mouse, and the wheel, the mouse wheel on this mouse has an inertial weight in it. So if you spin it fast enough, it breaks loose and it spins on its own like a top. And watch what you can do. You can go through images that quickly. I don't even have my hand on the mouse right now. So this makes for going through these images, thousands of them these days, because we take so many images in a shoot with 30 frames per second, it makes going through images much, much quicker. So I'm not going to go much further into this. I'm going to check mark just a couple. I'm not going to check mark any particular images. I'm just going to check mark a few of them just to show what happens. Once we go through these, I'm going to go through a bunch. Oh, there, some nice color there. We'll check that one. We're going to go through. Oh, I was trying some really slow shutter speeds and looking at autofocus here on the new Canon R5 Mark II to see how dark it would focus in really dark conditions, and it was doing pretty good, but I'm not going to keep any of those. We'll go through these really fast. Maybe get to some better. Oh, there we go. Night heron and some nice color. Click on that. Okay, so I've been picking a few images that I want to import. And now if you look over on the right, you can see that this is now lit up and it says 4 of the 2,400 plus images will be included in the import into that destination that we just talked about. So I'm going to pick just a couple more, like that one maybe. Go through, da, 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 da. You can go through even quicker if you want. If you know you just don't like this and want to skip way ahead, go down here to the bottom left and hit the grid view. And we can skip way down to when the light finally was out. Let's do that. Some ospreys flying, some pelicans flying. Here comes a wood stork. Let's look at those. Okay, now we're back to loop view again. And yeah, I like that wing position. We'll pick that one. And we'll pick See if he comes into the sun here a little bit. Yeah, there's a little more light on his wing, but not very well lit up. Let's see. Let's keep going. Ah, here comes the snowy. Kind of closer there. Let's get on the bird. There we go. Let's pick that one. So anyway, you get the idea. Now, once you have all of your images selected that you want to import off of your card for this shoot, you just simply go down to the import button down on the bottom right, and you hit import. And now you'll see in the upper left, it says importing, copy, and import photos. So now it's importing those few photos that we picked out of those 2,400 and putting them into the catalog. Now let's talk while it's doing this about the catalog. The catalogs in Lightroom do not actually contain the images that you import. They contain a reference to each image that you import, including a smaller version of the image, a small JPEG version, but all the metadata, but not the actual images. You can have it save one-to-one previews, and it will do that, and it'll put those in there for a short amount of time. It won't keep them forever, but it's a reference. So when you go to post-process these, which we're going to do in a moment, or at least 2 or 3 of them, it will refer back to the destination where you copied the actual image, and it will use the actual image, of course, in the post-processing of the image. But the catalog itself does not contain the actual full-size image. It contains all the reference of the destination where you put it, all the metadata, all the different things that you change when you go into and make your changes in Lightroom in the development module. Contains all that information, but it doesn't actually contain the image. So there you go. So now if we look over here, you can see we have a 9/30 2024 that showed up, and those 7 images are up that we imported. Now, these are one-to-one previews because I have that turned on, and we can go in and look at these. Not that there's anything spectacular here. Like I said, we just grab them just for demonstration. Go to that snowy egret. We can zoom in on that. Well, that's a pretty nice shot, I guess, right? So let's say we want to develop that. Well, we're not going to develop these. I've got some other ones picked out for development, but that's the next thing we're going to talk about. Now that we have images actually into the catalog, imported into the catalog in Lightroom Classic, and then copied to our destination on our external hard drive, we're going to go in and start the actual post-processing. So here we are in Lightroom Classic. I picked an image. This image is going to be a pretty decent sized crop, but for a reason, I picked this because once we crop in, you'll be able to see the noise better in the image. And when we get to the denoising part of this whole thing, you'll see the effect of the noise a lot better. So there's a rhyme and reason to what I'm doing here. But as you can see up here in the upper right hand corner of Lightroom Classic is the library module. That's what we're in now. We need to be in the develop module, of course, to do the post-processing. So let's go over to develop. Let's click on that. And now we're in the develop module. You've got all of the tools for your development of your image now on the right-hand side. Might as well take these kind of in order. It makes sense. And that's how I do my workflow. Why work with all of the pixels in this image? Why work with the whole image when you're not going to keep the whole image in the end? Let's go ahead and crop first. That's what I do first, generally crop for composition of my image. So we'll click up here on the crop tool, and I have it set to freeform. I don't have it set to 16 by 9 or 9 by 16 or 5 by 4 or 4 by, yeah, none of that. I like to get my image up here and I do a freeform composition, whatever fits the image best. So I'm going to draw a crop around my birds, which are my subject. And now we'll go ahead and we're going to do a little bit of a refinement. And hopefully, it's weird how some images they just don't have a good composition to make a good looking image sometimes. This is pretty straightforward, I think. So I'm looking here, give a little more room over on this side than on this side because this bird's looking this direction, that kind of thing. Maybe move this over. You don't want to get the wingtips too close. Hit enter on your keyboard. That'll bring in the crop. Now you can see up here your crop tool that there's a little dot below it. That means you did a crop. There's a crop there. You can see now down below in the film strip, here we are. This is the image we're working on, the one that's highlighted. And there's a little badge in there now that says, oh, photo has been cropped. So Lightroom Classic gives you a whole bunch of little signs and signals about what's been done to the image as you do it. Now we're cropped in. Let's go into 100%. And you can see that was done just by clicking on the left mouse button. You can see how sharp or not sharp this is a raw CR3 file from a Canon R5 Mark II. Here's some information about that shot up here in the upper left-hand corner. And one 1/6400th of a second was the shutter speed at aperture 5.6 and an ISO of 1600. And I have it showing the cropped dimensions once we cropped it. So it's 4289 by 37. What is that? 98. Okay, so let's go back out. That's pretty sharp raw file. The overall exposure, I think, is decent. So we just start working our way down these tools on the right-hand side. Temperature. The temperature looks fine. I don't think I'm going to warm it up or cool it off at all. Tint, I hardly ever change that. The next is exposure. That's something we might want to change. Looking at this, it's exposed pretty well. And you're going to get the idea here that the nicer the image you take in camera, this post-processing goes really fast. If there's a lot of changes to be made, of course, it's going to take a lot longer. And if it takes too long to post-process an image, that's giving you a signal, I think, that maybe it's not such a great image. Maybe you just need to go out and try to capture a better image. But anyway, so here we are. Everything, you look up at the histogram up at the very top, and you can see that it spans pretty much from 0 on the left, pure black, no data there, up to 255 on the right, which is pure white, no data after 255. Looks like it spans that entire range, tonal range, brightness range. It's a lot of the data is up on the upper right toward the bright side because a lot of this image is sky. So that's kind of how to read that. If we go down, I don't think I'm going to change the exposure on this image. If we zoom in on the top of the head, that's kind of where you might have something that's a little too bright. That's where ospreys tend to have the whitest whites. I can see good detail there. I can see maybe just this one little area where on its leg where it might be a little bright where you can't see as much detail as you'd like. So heck, let's go in and we're going to do an adjustment of just that one small area. We're going to do that using the masking tool up here. Let's invoke the masking tool and we're going to wait for it to come up. It takes a little time sometimes. And you've got subject up here, you've got sky, you've got background. We're not going to do any of that. We're going to do a very small part of this image. If you needed to do the subject or the background or the sky, you can definitely pick one of those, but we're going to use the brush. And the size of the brush you can change with the mouse wheel. My center mouse wheel I have set to change the size of the brush, which you can, I'm going to put it up in the wing here so you can see it better. And I'm going to make the brush about the size of the leg. I'm going to brush on there just that area that was a little too bright. And now we're going to come over here to exposure on the right, if I can find my cursor. Thank you. And we're going to bring the exposure down like that. That looks good, right? Yeah. No, okay, so we bring it back up, but we don't want to see any edging or anything like that obvious. And thinking somewhere around in there. So we brought that little area down by 0.6, a little more than half a stop, to bring in a little more detail there. So there's an example of using the masking tool, and it's a very powerful tool now in Lightroom Classic. Use it all the time. So now we can zoom back, get out of there and go back into the general development panels, zoom back out, look at the whole image again, and I think that's looking pretty good there. Contrast wise, the next slider down looks good to me. I don't think we're going to increase or decrease the contrast. Highlights, we could have used the highlight slider for that area and affect that area on the leg, but there's a problem with that. When you use the highlight slider, it's going to change the highlights of the entire image. And I didn't want to affect the brightness of the highlights in other parts of the image. They didn't need to be changed. So I don't use that. I didn't use that in this case. Shadows look fine. Here's where I see people make what I think is a mistake a lot of times. Underneath the wings of these two birds, it's shadowed. The tail's a little shadowed. That's fine. That's natural. The light isn't penetrating under there. The direction is more from here. I see a lot of people wanting to brighten those up to make it, if you take all the shadows away from your image, you lose depth in your image. It looks very unnatural. Try not to remove shadows or bring shadows up when you don't need to. In this case, we don't need to at all. Moving on down, whites and blacks. Now, we can check what's called the white and black point of this image here in Lightroom by holding down the Alt button on a PC or the Command key on a Mac, and then holding down the left mouse button on the slider for, let's say, the white point, whites, you can see what happens. Blacks it out, but then once you start sliding that slider, you can see pixels start lighting up. The whole point here is to bring it to where pixels just start to light up like right now, but then back it off, all right? And then let go. Now you set your white point for your image. This is really an important step. Do the same thing for the blacks. We just get it to where a few pixels are lighting up and then let go. And you can see what happened. We've changed the black and white point of this image a little bit. And it's clipping now. You can see up in the histogram up here on the upper left and upper right, there's clipping indicators. That little triangle's lit up now. It's not grayed out or black anymore. So let's go back down to the blacks again, and let's bring the blacks back up a little bit until that clipping goes mostly away. This is setting the black and white point of your image. What that does is if your image happens to be very compressed tonally, where it doesn't extend from basically 0 to 255 and everywhere in between, if it's all crunched down here, all crunched up here, or all crunched up in the middle, you're going to want to change your white and black points to bring it in. And then what that does is it tells the engine in Lightroom to change the tonal range. This is the restriction of tonal range. It's going to change that. and take full advantage of the full tonal range of your image. I like to actually do this in Photoshop better than doing it in here, and I'll show you how to do it in Photoshop. It's a little more precise in Photoshop than doing it here in Lightroom, I think, but I did it here to show you that you can do it here. I'll also show you how to do it in Photoshop. All right, because we're going to be taking this image out of Lightroom Classic and putting it into Photoshop in the end to finish up the processing. So we did whites and blacks, white and black point in this case, texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrant, saturation, all this stuff in this next block. What do we do here? Well, depends if we need to do anything or not. Saturation is something I play with a little bit. Let's just bump the saturation just a tiny bit, +4. You will a light hand when you post process. If you're having to really move things 70, 80, 90, either side, that's a ton. Maybe some issues going on there. So let's watch out for that. Here, just +4, just to bring up the saturation just a little bit. And didn't have to do anything with any of these other sliders at this point for this image. We can get into the tonal curves. We're not going to do anything there. Generally don't do anything there. Let's move down and we'll talk about a few other things that I use sometimes, but I'm not going to have to use with this image. The rotate under transform right here. Close it up, open it up. This rotate, I see a lot of people's images of birds when there's backgrounds and foregrounds involved that show how level the image is. They're not level. Okay, this is where you can change that by going into the rotate part of the transform panel and make your change. Not going to need to do that here, but that's where you would do it. Let's talk about lens corrections. I have it enable profile corrections. I have that checked. You can see that it knows that this was a Canon lens. It was the 600 RF f4 with the 1.4 times teleconverter on it, and it made distortion and vignetting changes to the image based on the profile for that lens and with the teleconverter. And I find it works really well. So I keep that check marked and just let it do its thing. But that's all those types of corrections I do in post-processing in here. So that's it. So this was a pretty easy one. And like I said, when you have an image that's pretty good to begin with, it doesn't take a whole lot. But we're going to finish this up now, and we're going to do it by taking it out of Lightroom Classic and into Photoshop. And that's super simple. All you have to do is put your cursor over here on the image, okay, on the image, and right-click your mouse. Go down to Edit In. Go over to Edit in Photoshop 2024 and click that. And it's going to open Photoshop and bring the image in automatically for you. Now, you don't see any panels, any editing panels over in Photoshop because I have a multi-screen setup, a multi-monitor setup, and I keep all my palettes on a separate monitor to give me the maximum amount of viewage. Viewage? Is that a word? Space to view the image in the image viewer part of Photoshop. So what I'll do is I'll drag palettes over as we're working on things so that you can see what's going on. So let's drag the layers palette over, and you can see that it's got a background layer of our image in there now. And the cool thing about Photoshop in a way is that you work in layers, so it's really easy to move things around and do different things, and then actually go all the way back to the beginning if that's what you wanted to do and things like that. Working in layers takes a little getting used to, but it's kind of a good thing. You can see there's a lock symbol on the right hand side of the background layer. It says background. Well, we don't really want it to be a background, and we're going to change that. We're going to click on that and make it a regular pixel layer, layer 0 in this case. And then we're going to drag that down to the plus sign down here, and we're going to let go, and that's going to copy that layer. So that gives us this base layer down here that we're not going to affect ever at all. And like I said, it makes it easy to go back and start all over if you want to, but we're not going to do a whole lot in Photoshop. We do most of it in Lightroom Classic. Most of our changes are made there. We come back to Photoshop and we're going to do just a few things here. Now, the first thing that I like to do is bring in an adjustment layer, and I'll bring the adjustments palette over so you can see that. There's a lot of different adjustments you can make to an image, but we're worried about the levels adjustment. I want to add a levels adjustment to this image process that we're working on, and I'm going to click on that, and you can see now in the layers palette up here that we've got a levels 1. What happened then when I did that is in the properties palette, which I just brought over, it's got that levels layer properties shown. And this is where you would do the white and black point changes or adjustments in Photoshop, principally the same way you do it in Lightroom Classic. You hold down the Alt key, and now you see down here, here, and here, these are the black and white point sliders. And with the Alt held down and again holding down the left mouse, it does the same thing that it did in Lightroom Classic. But to me, these are actually the black and white point sliders in a form that you can really see what's happening a lot better than in Lightroom Classic. So again, we did this adjustment already, so we're not going to make any changes here, but you can see that it's doing the same thing. See how those whites are a little too bright there? I can bring that down. I don't want to see any. I'm going to keep it at 255. So it's a little more precise in Photoshop, and this is where I generally do this. Now that I have, that's generally all the adjustments I make in Photoshop, unless I'm going to do something like cloning or stuff like that. I would do that here. The tools for that are over on the left-hand side. Generally, I don't do any cloning or anything like that. So it's not used a whole lot. This is generally all I do in Photoshop up to this point. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a compressed or flattened version of the image that we're working on here in Photoshop. We've got 3 layers. As you can see in the layers panel here, we have 3 layers that make up what we've been doing to this image. I want to take all of these and flatten them and compress them and put them into one layer. And to do that, there's a keystroke shortcut, and it's Control-Shift-Alt-E. And now you can see what happened is it put a new layer up top called Layer 1 in our Layers panel. And if you look in the History panel, I'll bring that over real quick, you can see the last thing that happened in our history of working with this image is Stamp Visible. And that creates a flattened version, taking all of the layers, all the changes we made, which was really only 1 in this case, puts them together and puts that as a flattened version of what we've done as a pixel layer at the very top of our layers. I'm going to move the history back out of the way. And so now, at this point, I saved this image as a TIFF file. So if we go up to File, and we hit Save As, not Save, we're going to put it in a folder on a hard drive that I have connected, an external hard drive that I've connected to my desktop. And it's going to go into the folder Images for Wildlife Process for this year, 2024. And I've got a folder under that, a subfolder called Osprey's Inlet. And that's because this was taken at the Sebastian Inlet, this picture. And that's where it's going to go. And I'm, of course, going to rename it something that will make some sense. So a quick way to start out is just to click an image that's already there, and it puts that title down there. So you don't have to type as much this way. And we're going to call this Osprey's Top Side Attack. Something like that. Yeah. I'm not going to worry about the title for this because we just want to keep moving along with this video. And I'm going to save it as a TIFF file because this is going to save all of those layers. If you save it as a JPEG right now, it's going to compress everything and you're going to lose all the layers. And you may want to come back at a later date and work with this image again, make a few changes to it. And having the TIFF file available to do that makes things a whole lot quicker. Why don't I use Photoshop's file, PSD file? Because I like TIFFs better. It's a non-proprietary type file format, and that's why I use it. You could come down here and you could make it a Photoshop, a PSD, but I use TIFF. And then I hit save. And it's going to bring up some TIFF options, no compression. All of this stuff is just left as default. So now you can see up in the upper left, this image is no longer the CR3 file. It's not named that way. It now says the name that we put in there and that it's a TIFF file. And it's saving and it's 99% done. Now it's done. Okay, so now we have the TIFF file, but that's not where I stop. Now is when I actually do denoising and sharpening. A lot of people do this in the very beginning, at the very beginning stage with their raw files. I do not do that. I think the results are better if you wait until after you've cropped the image, if you resize it and resample it, and you're going to save it as a JPEG or something like that. That's the time, once your image is done, once you've made all the changes to it, you've cropped it, you've resized it, now's the time to do the denoising and sharpening, because that's going to be the most accurate treatment, is once the image is in its final state. If you do it in the beginning when it's raw and then you crop it and then you resize it and then you save it, things can change. Pixel dimensions can change if you change the size of your image and you resample it. And then those denoising processes and especially sharpening may not be very accurate anymore to the final product that is your image. So I wait to do this until the end. This is going to be contentious with some people, I know, but I think the detail comes out. I think in the end, it's the final product. What does it look like? I think it looks the best this way most often. So this is why I do it this way. All right. I'm going to get a drink because I'm getting thirsty talking so much. So now here we are. We're here. Now I'm going to show you a little something. Cool thing about Photoshop is you can record what are called actions. If there are certain things you do to every image, basically every image, then why not, when you go through that process once, record that process, save it as what's called an action, so that the next time you do it on your next image and the next image and the next image, all you have to do is click on that action and push the play button, and it does it all automatically. So I'm going to show you that right now. I'm going to bring you over the actions palette, and you can see right here that I have some actions that I saved. And this is how I proceed from this point, where I actually resize the image and then I sharpen and denoise it. So we're just going to pick this action down here called resize Topaz DeNoise. And we're going to hit the drop down arrow, and it's going to uncover all the different steps that I recorded for this action. The first part is that it's going to delete this top layer in the layers, the one that we created for the TIFF file. Now again, this isn't going to delete it from the TIFF file. It's just going to delete it from this process, and we're going to resave this as a completely different thing. We're going to resave it. We're going to save the final version of this from this action as a JPEG. But the first step is it's going to delete that current layer that I have clicked, that top one. Then it's going to flatten the image. It's going to take all of the layers below that and flatten it. And then it's going to convert the mode. It's going to convert the mode from 16 bits to 8 bits because we're going to create a JPEG, and this JPEG is meant to be put on the web, and 8 bits work fine. Bit depth there is fine. So it's going to convert the mode to 8. It's going to convert the profile, the color profile, to sRGB. Right now it's in Adobe RGB, and you don't want to be putting Adobe RGB images on the web. They don't look good. They look gray and not nice. So you want to convert it, if it's not already in sRGB, to sRGB color profile before you put it on the web. That's what the next step does. And then it's going to change the image size, and I save 3000 pixel on the long side, whichever aspect the image is in, whether it's a landscape or portrait, whichever the longest side is. I want it to be 3000 pixels long, and I save 3000 pixel on the long side JPEGs, and those are what I use for a lot of what I use my images for on the web and things like that, for use in my YouTube videos and things like that. Okay, you can also save a full-size version of this if you want as a JPEG, but I'm going to reduce it in this example because saving it as a full size, there's not a whole lot to that. Okay, so anyway, we're going to save it. That's the next step, is image size change, and it's going to resample the image. And what that means is that it's going to change the pixel dimensions. This isn't the same as cropping. Cropping does not change the dimensions of the pixels that make up the image. By resampling, when you resize, resizing is different than cropping. When you take the image from what it is now, which is 4289 on the long side by 3797 pixels on the short side, when you take that and you actually reduce the long side to 3000 pixels, and you have the resample box checked, which I'll show you here in a minute, in the resizing part of Photoshop, it resamples the image. It combines pixels. It changes pixels to pixel dimensions. And this is where you get into trouble if you've already sharpened your image, because sharpening is pixel dimension. It depends. If they change, that the accuracy of that sharpening can be no longer optimal. So anyway, here we go. So then the last step is it's going to invoke Topaz DeNoise AI as a plugin to Photoshop and allow us to do our denoising and sharpening. So to do all this, you have to record this the first time you do it using the record button down here, the little circle. But now, since it's already recorded and I want to run this action, I click on the action. It's highlighted now in gray, and I press the play button. And then, boom, there we go. It did something, didn't it? So what it did is it brought up, it got down to a certain one of the action steps, and it stopped because I have what's called a remark in there to stop and bring up a box, a dialog box, to allow me to make changes if I want to at this step. This is the image size step that I just showed you, and it's going to say, okay, do you want it to be 3000 wide by 2656 high? And I said, yep, that's fine in this case. If this would have been a vertical image, one taken in portrait rather than landscape format, I would have to switch this. I would take and make this 3000, the height, rather than the width be 3000. But because this is basically a landscape version or oriented image, we can leave it exactly the same. And I hit OK. Boom, it made the image smaller, and then it brings up denoise automatically. Topaz DeNoise AI. I love it. And here's what I really like about it. Let me move this over so that you can see that the denoise window opened up, and here are the different algorithms, let's put it that way, that you can invoke in Topaz DeNoise AI. And the one that's highlighted right now is clear. I love the clear algorithm. And if we move down to the model preferences for noise removal and sharpening, these I move around from low to high in either one of them, depending on how much of each I need. For me, the critical setting is the recover original detail. down below. Having that set to 50. If you don't set it to 50 and you bring it all the way down to 1 or all the way up much higher, if it's all the way down to 1 and you don't want to recover any of the original detail, it's a little too heavy-handed when it comes to the denoising part and the sharpening part. By keeping it at 50, the whole result that you get, the final result that you get, is much more natural and less heavy-handed overall. So that's the setting that I think is really, really important. So I have it set up to be the before and after slider. So you watch the top bird's eye as you go across, and I've got it set to medium remove noise and high sharpness. Look at the lower bird's eye as I go by. It's difficult to really see when you're doing work like this on a computer and trying to do a demonstration like this, but it's doing an amazing job bringing out the detail. Look at the bird's leg, the bottom bird's leg, the scales as we go by, how much more defined they become. This image is sharp enough in camera that I'm going to turn down the sharpness to low. There's not a lot of noise in this image to begin with, so I'm going to put it to low as well, leaving the recover original detail set to 50. I almost always leave it there. You can still see, after making those changes as we go across these critical areas of the birds, that it really brings out the detail and removes the noise, but doesn't destroy feather detail in the bird when it removes noise. This is what I consider a very natural result. It looks good, it looks natural, but boy, does it bring out the details. So now if you like it, if you like these results, you go down to the bottom right and you hit apply. And the cool thing is the clear algorithm is really fast. And now it applied that to the version in Photoshop, and we can go Control Plus and bring that up to 100%. So we're looking at it just like we looked at it in DeNoise AI, because DeNoise always shows it to you in 100% magnification. You can see it looks basically exactly the same. You can see it looks exactly the same as it did in the DeNoise window. And so now we've reduced the size, we sharpened and denoised it, and those are accurate adjustments. And now we're going to save this and go to Save As in Photoshop as a JPEG. That's 3,000 pixels on the long side. You can see that down in the bottom left, that we're working now with the reduced sized image. Up here in the upper left, it still says it's a TIFF because that's the image we're working with. But we're not, if you just hit save now, if you go over here to File and hit save, it's going to take these changes and save it to that original TIFF file that we made. You don't want to do that. It'll get rid of all of the layers and everything else, because you can see right now up in the layers palette, there's just one layer, a background layer. We don't want to alter that original TIFF. So it's very important here that you hit Save As and do that rather than Save. So we go to File, Save As. I'm going to add a 3000 to the end of the name of this image, because that's my notation for this is the 3000 pixel on the long side version of the image. And change TIFF to JPEG. And then we're going to hit save. Do you want it? It gives you JPEG options, just like it gave you TIFF options. Do you want to change the quality 12 maximum? Everything's maximum here. Hit OK. Now you can see in the upper left that it is the 3000 JPEG. It's no longer the TIFF. Let's go ahead and right click on that and close all. So now nothing's open in Photoshop. Let's go back to File and Open, and we can find that file that we just did. I did a lot of this Osprey over the top attack 3000. There it is. That's the JPEG version, and there's the TIFF is also in there at the bottom because I have them sorted. So that is basically my process, my workflow for doing a bird image. It goes from Lightroom Classic into Photoshop. You invoke Topaz DeNoise as a plugin in Photoshop. Once you've done all the work you want to do on the image, that's going to do the sharpening and denoising, and then you save. And along the way, we're saving a TIFF version of the full-size image, full size being after we've cropped it for composition and things like that, and then saving a 3000 pixel on the long side version. And it's that quick. It took a little time to explain it, but you can see that if you just go through and do this process, it's really pretty quick, a few minutes to do an image. If the image needs more work, it's going to take longer. But if an image takes, like I said earlier, if it takes too much time, if you're messing around because the exposure was bad and all this kind of stuff, or it wasn't sharp and you're trying to really sharpen, so hey, it's probably an image that you could do better. Just go try to make a better image in your camera. Okay, so we're going to go through one more image, and we're going to do it quickly without much explanation so that you can see the whole process in a much smoother flow. Here we go. We've got this picture of an osprey. We're going to go into the develop module. We're going to go to crop, do a freeform crop, get the composition that I want. Something like that. Hit enter. All right, now we're going to look at the exposure and temperature here. Maybe bring the temp up just a little bit. And then let me turn on my highlighter here so you can see where I'm clicking and stuff a little bit better. How about exposure? Let's see what we can do here. Maybe a little bit of an exposure adjustment. 0.30. Bring up the saturation just a little bit. +5. Contrast doesn't look bad. Temperature, let's bring it up to 7,000. In that range anyway. Okay, I like that. As far as any other changes, I'm not going to do black and white point here. I'm going to do that in Photoshop. Don't need any rotation here. This looks good coming across where that line is between the grass and vegetation and the beach. Sand looks pretty level. And that's what your eye's gonna, that's what the viewer's eye is gonna kind of go to as far as assessing whether everything's level in this. So that's really all we're gonna do in here. I'm gonna right click. I'm gonna go to edit in Photoshop. It'll come up in Photoshop. Get out of the crop mode there. Bring over my palettes so you can see what's happening here. I'll close up this history palette a little bit. There's not going to be much history to look at. I'm not going to do a whole lot in Photoshop. I have actions set recorded for what I do in Photoshop. The first one would be to make a TIFF file out of this. We'll expand that action. It's got taking the background layer and making it a regular layer is the first step, then duplicating that layer, and then making an adjustment layer, bringing in basically a levels layer to check the white and black point, which we'll do, and then it's going to merge and flatten the visible layers, and then it's going to go into the save dialog. That's what the steps that would be involved here, except I've got those recorded in an action. I've got some remarks here on the side, so at certain points in this action as it's running, it's going to bring up a dialog to let me change things if I want to. And I call this the basic workflow TIFF. And I hit play, and here it says new layer, levels 1. I hit OK. There's the properties for the levels layer that just popped up. You can see over here in the layers panel that now it has a levels layer added. I'm going to check the white point and the black point. The levels properties dialog. Hold down Alt, hold down the left mouse button over the black point slider and bring it up until there's just a few pixels lit up in the darkest areas of the bird in this case, and let go. We're going to do the same thing for the white point. It looks like the white point needs to be moved quite a bit looking at the histogram there. We're going to move it over until whites start lighting up, the lightest pixels in the image. Bring it back down until there's nothing lit up. Let go. We just set the white and black point. That's to take it full advantage of the full tonal range that was recorded when this image was captured. We hit OK there. It will take us into the save. That's the next step. And I'm going to save this as an Osprey image. I'm just going to say Osprey leave water beach or something like that. Doesn't matter. Put a descriptive title in there so that you basically know by looking at the title what the image is about. We save as type. Keep that as TIFF. Hit save. Brings up the TIFF options dialog. We're going to leave all that as defaults. Hit OK. And there we go. We've got a TIFF version of this image saved. Now we're going to, well, it's still saving, but we're going to go in and run another action that I have. This time we're going to create a JPEG, but we're going to reduce the size of that JPEG from the original size, because this is the JPEGs I use for web applications, like putting it on my SmugMug site, putting it on the web, on YouTube, using it in YouTube videos, putting it on Instagram, things like that. So I want a smaller version in JPEG format. We're going to come over here. Now that you can see up here where it says Osprey Leave Water Beach, it's a TIFF. Okay, so next we're going to take this TIFF file that we created, and we're going to make a 3000 pixel on the long size JPEG for use on the web and Instagram and things like that. I have an action set up for that as well. Let me put my highlighter back on. Maybe that helps a little bit right here. But I'm going to go through it step by step. I'm not going to run the action this time, so you can see the steps that are involved. We're going to go up, and we're going to first go to layer, and we're going to flatten. You can see it's a multi-layer image. We don't want to work with that. We want to flatten this image to one layer. Then we're going to go to image again, and we're going to hit mode, and we want to go from 16 bits per channel to 8 bits per channel for use on the web. Then we're going to go to edit. We're going to come down here to convert to profile, and we're going to take this photo from ProPhoto RGB and bring it into sRGB for use on the web. Then we're going to go to image, and we're going to go to image size, because like I said, I don't want this full size. If I wanted to keep this and make a full size JPEG out of it, the size of our TIFF file, I wouldn't do this step, but I want a 3000 pixel on the long side, and the long side in this case happens to be the height. We're going to double click in there. We're going to make that 3000 and hit OK. You can see now that the image has shrunk in size, and we're at 33%. Bring that up, Control plus, bring that up to 66% or so we can see it better. And now we have the image at the size we want it. Now is when I do my denoising and sharpening, and I do it last, basically the last step before I save the JPEG, because now the image is at the size I'm going to use it. And if you do sharpening and denoising prior to having the image at the size that you are going to use it, that sharpening and denoising may not be accurate anymore, and your image may not look as nice as it could. So I wait until the last step. So we go in here and we hit filter, go down to Topaz Labs, go to Topaz DeNoise. We're going to use DeNoise in this case. It's going to open DeNoise as a plugin. Let's bring this up. Here's DeNoise. It brings it in at 100%. That's where you want to look at it. Over here on the right, we've got some parameters that we need to set. There's several algorithms for removing noise that are available to you. I like clear. I use clear 90+% of the time. I like, when it comes to noise removal and enhancing the sharpness, I'll move these around depending on the image. Right now they're set at medium noise removal and low sharpening. Got the slider, so on this side of the slider over here is after these settings have been applied, and on the left is before. Another parameter that you have to set over here is recover original detail. I set that at 50%. That's what the 50 stands for. 50 in this case, I almost never change. I think that's a really good setting. It results in a very natural looking denoising and sharpening of my images. So if we take this across, just take a look at the scales on the bird's legs and feet, and then look at the eye as we come across. And of course you can see the noise being removed. Once we get it all the way across and we look at the bird, what I'm looking for is retention of detail in the feathers, feather veins, stuff like that, making sure that when we're removing the noise, we're not removing too much detail in the feathers. Going to remove a little bit to get rid of the noise in the bird here, but not bad. It looks natural. The eye is sharpened up nice. The feet and legs have sharpened up nice. If you want it to be a little sharper, try going to high on the sharpen. Let it run its Now it's done. It's sharpened a little bit more, but generally what that does is it takes potentially a little more of the detail out of the feathers when you go to high sharpening, but we'll just leave it on high for now. I think that looks pretty nice. So we hit apply, and it's going to process this image and then apply it to the version in Photoshop. And we can bring this up, Control plus, and look at it 100% in Photoshop, and you can see it looks pretty much like it did in Topaz. So I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to save the JPEG. So I go up to File and I go Save As. It's going to open up at the name that we called the TIFF file, and it's still set to TIFF down here. I'm going to add a little bit to the name of this. I'm going to put a 3000 at the end. That's my indexing, or my indication that this is a 3000 pixel on the long side version of this image. And I'm going to change TIFF to JPEG, and I'm going to hit save. And the JPEG options come up. Quality I want to be maximum. Everything else is left to the default, and I hit OK. And now you look up here, and now this is changed from TIFF, and the name is changed to the JPEG name with the 3000 at the end and a JPEG suffix on there. So that's it. We are done processing this image. And you can see it doesn't take very long when you're working with an image that's decent quality coming out of the camera. And once you get used to your workflow, this workflow, you can go through it pretty rapidly, and it comes out really, really nice. So that is my workflow quick version. So we'll get out of here, go back to my studio, and we will finish up this video. Okay, so there you have it. There's my workflow, shown with great detail, at least some detail, and then a much quicker version. So I hope there was some things in there that helped you a bit. Maybe you can try some different things in your workflow. Leave comments down below. Please make your comments constructive. If you've got different ways of doing things, great. Put them in there because other people want to see that. Gives them ideas. Hey, gives me ideas for maybe how to improve or change up my workflow a little bit. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you have great light. I hope you're getting great images. Be safe. I'll see you soon.